In The Secret Doctrine, H.P. Blavatsky refers to the story of the Greek Titan, Prometheus, as the greatest, the most ancient, and the most suggestive of the old myths. It is the creation of neither Hesiod nor Aeschylus, she says, but belongs to, quote, the dawn of human consciousness, unquote, and has its corollary in every ancient theogony. It is also among the most heterodox, she says, in relation to modern conceptions of human nature as found in both religion and science. Yet it seems to embody profound truths and provides a rich metaphor for the student who wishes to approach a better understanding of the mysteries of the human mind and the fundamental distinction and relationship that we're exploring this evening between reason and intuition, as found in the perennial philosophy. The outlines of the myth, as portrayed in the Greek tragedy, are well known, but their underlying meaning is not. The fire that Prometheus stole from the gods on Mount Olympus and delivered to mankind is often taken as an allegory referring to the human discovery, control, and use of physical fire. In theosophical thought, however, the divine fire is both spiritual and intellectual. It is not only the mysterious faculty of self-awareness and the capacity for autonomous reasoning and creativity, for choice and individual responsibility, which we know distinguishes the human from the animal kingdom. It is also that capacity within every human being for perfected wisdom and compassion, for knowledge consonant with the universal intelligence behind all of nature, and for, as HPB says, for reunion with the highest deity, that of formless spirit. The word Prometheus means foreknowledge, that is, prophecy and seership, knowledge which in its highest noetic form sees not only the future, but piercing the many veils of nature, sees directly into the essence of things. This direct and unmediated intuitive knowing, without bias or error, says H.P. Blavatsky, is Theosophia, God knowledge, and it is one of the great purposes of the theosophical movement in whatever form it has taken through the ages, to keep the possibility and promise of this potential alive in the human heart. In a memorable passage from her collected writings, H.P. Blavatsky outlines the mode of operation and outcome of consciousness engaged in the intuitive process, as opposed to knowledge gained through physical sense experience. This is from volume 11, where she says, "Every one of us possesses the faculty, the interior sense known as intuition, but how rare are those who know how to develop it. It is, however, the only faculty by means of which men and things are seen in their true colors. It is an instinct of the soul which grows in us in proportion to the use we make of it, and which helps us to perceive and understand real and absolute facts with far more certainty than can the simple use of our senses and the exercise of our reason. What are called good sense and logic enable us to see the appearance of things, that which is evident to everyone. The instinct of which I speak, being a projection of our perceptive consciousness, a projection which acts from the subjective to the objective and not vice versa, awakens spiritual senses in us and the power to act. These senses assimilate to themselves the essence of the object or of the action under examination and represent them to us as they really are, not as they appear to our physical senses and to our cold reason." The concept of human reason, its meaning and scope, has been a topic of philosophical debate since ancient times and has been defined by different thinkers in different ways. In the late 1700s, Thomas Paine wrote that reason is, quote, "the most formidable weapon against errors of every kind. I have never used any other, and I trust I never shall," unquote. In his pamphlet entitled The Age of Reason, Paine sought to expose the spurious claims made by Christianity of the Bible as revelation, or the unquestionable Word of God. Paine not only pointed out that key stories in the Bible were derived from previous mythological traditions, he also noted that many parts are riddled with human error, self-contradictory statements, and immoral actions attributed to an angry or indifferent God. Although he did not speak of or acknowledge the esoteric character of the Gospels as H.P.B. did in her writings, still he saw the life of Jesus as being morally exemplary. But instead, Paine recommended the study of nature, which he called, quote, the Bible of creation, pervaded by the wisdom of God, as an aid to the awakening of individual discriminative reason and moral conscience. In doing so, he sought to help purge the new government being born in America, not only from the British Crown, but also from state religion. He sought to uplift and liberate thought from slavish conformity to man-made institutions, which utilized false theology, priestcraft, and superstition in order to terrify, monopolize, and manipulate others. And we recommend the article by William Quan Judge entitled Adepts in America, 1776, in which he speaks specifically of Thomas Paine and also the Masons of the Founding Fathers who surrounded him as being influenced by the masters who are associated with the Theosophical movement. Revelation as a direct transmission from the divine, Paine wrote, can be such only for the person to whom it occurs, not for the person who hears about it or reads an account of it in a book. Any religion which claims infallibility for its Bible is subject to the same fallacy, he said. Despite his emphasis upon reason, Paine implicitly affirmed the potential for each person to directly access that inner illumination that we call intuition, and described his own experience in this way. And this is from The Age of Reason, page 36. There are two distinct classes of what are called thoughts, those that we produce in ourselves by reflection and the act of thinking, and those that bolt into the mind of their own accord. I have always made it a rule to treat those voluntary visitors with civility, taking care to examine, as well as I was able, if they were worth entertaining, and it is from them I have acquired almost all the knowledge that I have. Reason as the capacity for rationality, as clarity, continuity, and precision of thought, as the careful examination of observable facts and the logical sequencing of premise and conclusion, is a vital component, not only of philosophy but of all fields of knowledge. Some historians argue that the growth and inventive application of reason and the scientific method, as applied to many fields, was an essential precedent in the transition from agrarian-based economies in Europe and America to the industrial and technological revolutions that followed the Enlightenment era in which Paine lived. At a time when wood and stone were the only materials being used for bridge building, for example, Paine himself invented the first iron bridge that could span over 230 feet. No doubt the accumulation of practical scientific knowledge and rapid material progress witnessed since the mid-18th century or so has brought about many general benefits, particularly in accommodating a world population that grew from about 1 billion in 1790 to 7.3 billion today. But at what cost to the planet and to those masses of humanity who were and are exploited by industry, oppressed, relatively uneducated, or living in abject poverty, the forgotten multitude. Paine, as an ardent deist and theophilanthropist, would never have advocated for advances in science and technology as divorced from ethics, from reverence for the God in nature, and from duty and service to the whole of mankind. Theosophically, this would be part of what it means to, quote, honor the unseen, and to begin aligning reason with unity and human solidarity, karma, and reincarnation, the hidden moral laws and truths in nature. These are the fundamental features of the science of spirituality, which H.P. Blavatsky called in the Key to Theosophy the Four Golden Links, which, quote, bind humanity into one family. Without these underlying assumptions, convictions, and restraints, a mind sharpened by a disciplined reasoning faculty often only strengthens and emboldens the reach of human vanity, the unscrupulous and self-seeking, the war-making, and the profiteering. The secret doctrine teaches that which wells up as individual human consciousness is but a ray descended from a divine, unitary, and universal source. Each human being is a, quote, drop in the ocean of immortality, said HPB, a soul indissolubly bound to all other souls and to a common spiritual root. Contrary to mechanistic models of evolution, the spiritual precedes, guides, and forces forward the evolutionary development of the psychic and the physical. Over long periods, unguessed at by modern chronologies of Earth time, and guided by intelligent purpose and design, nature has slowly evolved material vestures appropriate for the descent of the soul into the cycle of repeated incarnations. This is for a grand and wholly beneficent purpose. Mahat, or Mahabuddhi, are two Sanskrit terms used in theosophical thought to refer to the living archetypal intelligence and divine ideation that suffuses the hidden architecture of nature, and which manifests as natural and karmic law and as instinct in the lower kingdoms. It also descends as a mysterious Promethean host and becomes that ray of imperishable reincarnating intelligence called manas in each human being. But in the process of individuation, the divine light of mind is partially eclipsed by two things. First, by the development of the senses and reason on the astral and physical planes. But also, and more importantly, it becomes trapped by misidentification with the lower self, the vestures of incarnation rather than the bright spirit, the higher self above. The first sin, we're told, was succumbing to the illusion of separateness. From this fundamental misconception, personal desire and the misuse of powers arose. Repeated violations of the law of karmic unity, compounded over many lives, led to further blindness. Over long ages, we progressively obscured not only our own ability to see and understand the deeper truths and laws of nature, but the reality of our true self, the self of all. The human mind and reasoning faculty, in the grip of the fires of the lower self, of the personal ego and selfish desire, is symbolized by the angry and despotic Zeus. In this context, Zeus represents ignorance and those, quote, cruel and crafty powers of the separated self, which keep Prometheus, the divine fires of the higher nature of spiritual intuition and compassion, chained to the rock of matter, tortured daily by the vulture of insatiable desire. This is one way of describing the fundamental dilemma not only of our age, but of any age, and is the archetypal struggle that rages within each of us. Immanuel Kant, who HPB called the greatest philosopher of European birth, wrote some of the most influential treatises in Western philosophy on the principle of reason. Echoing ideas found in Eastern thought, he taught that pure reason is capable of, quote, knowing without being shown, and of, quote, determinations independent of empirical constraints, unquote. Once freed of dogmas, cowardice, and laziness, purified reason can and ought to arrive at universal principles by which any action can be evaluated morally. A few years before Paine published The Age of Reason, Kant released his treatise Grounding for a Metaphysics of Morals, whose central philosophical concept was what he called the categorical imperative, which is stated in this way: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. In order to properly read the book of nature and comprehend it correctly, says H.P. Blavatsky, even the most penetrating intellect of the animal brain will not suffice. Rather, the innate powers of the soul must be developed. Ideal laws, he says, can be perceived by the intuitive faculty alone. Quote, they are beyond the domain of argument and dialectics, and no one can understand or rightly appreciate them through the explanations of another mind, unquote. If this is true, is reason as normally understood simply a block to the development of intuition, or may it be retrained as an aid and servant? In the absence of a direct perception of spiritual realities, is it possible for each individual to develop and refine the use of reason to reflect or mirror higher truths in their own spheres of duty and service? Can the arts and sciences, both theoretical and practical, be realigned and regenerated to embrace fundamental moral imperatives, such as that stated by Kant? Should not such human endeavors attempt to reflect ideals that serve the betterment of all, the higher purposes of human evolution, of universal welfare and enlightenment? This would certainly seem to be suggested not only by what we call the modern theosophical movement, but by a long line of thinkers, not only Paine and Emerson, but also Krishna, Buddha, and Christ, as well as Pythagoras and Plato. In fact, in the classical Greek conception, what later became translated by the word reason was originally connected with logos, not only word or speech, but also with logic and demiurgos, the causal and creative origin of all things. This is why we hear the Pythagoreans suggesting that the cosmos itself is governed by reason, a sublime and sacred mathematical order, a divine archetypal rationale of unfoldment and return. In the Phaedrus, Socrates calls reason the soul's pilot, who alone can behold that place beyond the heavens, with no color or shape, where all knowledge, justice, temperance, and true being dwells. Here, taught Plato, reason lays hold of the intelligibles, the divine ideas or pure forms, and descends smoothly back to earth, to the realm of becoming, nourished and sustained. Similarly, Damodar Mavalankar describes the primary stage of true contemplation in esoteric philosophy as utilizing both the deductive and inductive methods. The deductive he describes as a process of reasoning from the unknown to the known, while the inductive begins with the known and works its way back. The unknown for us are those universal principles, ideals, and axioms articulated by great teachers, which speak spontaneously to the intuition and which we desire to make living realities and potencies in our lives. These, he says, must first be intellectually comprehended by the student if he or she truly hopes to realize their aspirations. The known is all that which we experience through the senses. To properly reconstruct, then, this Promethean bridge between heaven and earth, the universal and the particular, the infinite to the finite and back again, is to engage in a process of repeated purification, elevation, and regeneration of all the vestures of thought and action, while also making them more permeable and receptive to divine influx, to what is spoken of in the golden verses of Pythagoras as, quote, that understanding which comes from above and that ought to hold the reins. The first principle of perennial philosophy, and therefore of deductive thought, is that of radical and absolute unity, which fuses higher thought with unbounded benevolence, transcendence with immanence. The contemplative process thus enjoined may also be described as the inexpressible yearning of the inner man to go out towards the infinite, which in the olden time was the real meaning of adoration. If this inner adoration is assiduously sustained, says Mavalankar, and in fact he says that ultimately it must be kept up without a single moment's relaxation. If this is done, it will, in time, lead to both physiological and psychological transformations, eventually dissolving and blending the individuality entirely with the all. Such efforts, he says, will someday fit us for work on a higher plane, by and through which infinitely greater good can be done than in our present condition. The word intuition means insight, direct or immediate cognition, spiritual perception. It has its root in the Latin intuere, to look at or watch over. Like dream experiences, authentic intuitions can be of many different types, from the whispering voice of conscience that provides invaluable guidance in daily life, to philosophical, scientific, or socio-political insights that help to solve perplexing problems, to clear and direct experiences of universal truths. Far from being a mere hunch or gut feeling, intuition in its higher forms can also see directly to the core of particular events and circumstances, or instantly grasp the essence of an entire life's experience. Even modern psychology recognizes intuition as a mysterious cognitive capacity that often far transcends the normal processes of ratiocinative thought. Despite the emphasis upon rigorous existential observation and logic, many of the key breakthroughs in modern science have occurred through intuitive insights that were only later rationally understood. A well-documented case is that of Friedrich August Kekule, a 19th century German chemist, who told of a daydream in which hydrogen atoms ordered themselves into a hexagon, encircled by the image of a snake biting its own tail. This was the first mapping that we know of a molecular structure which brought a new clarity to the field and revolutionized organic chemistry. Similarly, by his own accounts, Einstein's theories of both general and special relativity arrived in flashes of insight. Many years of intensive effort followed, in which the corresponding mathematics could be worked out. In theosophical thought, such experiences may be partial or direct reflections of the Buddhi-Manasic principle of higher consciousness. In The Secret Doctrine, Buddhi is defined as, quote, the faculty of cognizing the channel through which divine knowledge reaches the ego, the discernment of good and evil, divine conscience also, and spiritual soul, unquote. It is that universal storehouse of divine wisdom within each human being and within nature, says H.P. Blavatsky, which has been the feeding source of all the great religious and spiritual traditions of mankind, and which perpetually sustains the often unconscious conviction of, quote, a higher divine reality and a spiritual life to come, unquote. The discipline which leads to the self-conscious awakening of this faculty of direct and immediate knowing, where object and subject are one, and which culminates in perfect union with the highest divine essence, is the aim of all true mystics and seers, she says. It can be found reiterated in different ways in the Voice of the Silence, the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali, and other sacred writings down through the ages. In the 19th century, H.P. Blavatsky drew all true seekers to heed this call of ancient wisdom, not for individual glory and attainment, but out of duty and service to humanity, in order to properly honor the light and legacy of Prometheus, the first great philanthropist. Such a path requires the purification of motive at every step, the repeated and relentless canceling of the proclivities and concerns of personal egotism. We will close our talk with another passage taken from the collected writings, where HPB simply and deftly summarizes this path of self-mastery, while also emphasizing the manifold discipline and penetrating discrimination that is required. It's given in the form of a dialogue between the student and the sage, and this is from Collected Writings, Volume 9, page 400. Student, how is one to know when he gets real occult information from the self within? Sage, intuition must be developed, and the matter judged from the true philosophical basis. For if it is contrary to true general rules, it is wrong. It has to be known from a deep and profound analysis by which we find out what is from egotism alone and what is not. If it is due to egotism, then it is not from the Spirit and is untrue. The power to know does not come from book study, nor from mere philosophy, but mostly from the actual practice of altruism in deed, word, and thought. For that practice purifies the covers of the soul and permits that light to shine down into the brain-mind. As the brain-mind is the receiver in the waking state, it has to be purified from sense perception. And the truest way to do this is by combining philosophy with the highest outward and inward virtue.